From trauma to magic mushrooms. This episode was just recorded live. My guest was Mike Steed, and he basically talks about his life. Growing up, traumatized, finally had to resort to magic mushrooms, and what an incredible story. You're gonna love this. Thank you so much for being with me today. I am Dr. Dave. This is Microdose U.
Enter the world of magic mushrooms with Microdose U.
If you don't mind, Mike, give us like a little synopsis about, like, pretend it's kind of like your first episode and give us a little bit of a synopsis about your life and what happened and then where it's gone. And then we'll kind of open it up to some questions. So you don't feel you have to share every single thing, because we'll definitely catch a lot of stuff with questions.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll kind of start from the beginning and then we can go from there. Stop me if you need to. But so yeah, obviously I was raised Mormon. I grew up in Utah. I was the third of 7 kids, so a big Mormon family. And I was all in it ever since I was young. Like, I really resonated with it. It was my identity. It was my connection with God. It was my worldview, complete worldview growing up. You know, I didn't leave the church until I was 33 years old, and that was like 10 years ago. So I was in it for a long time. And I grew up, I had a really lovely childhood, very loving family. You know, my parents were well off. I had good friends. I bring that up because when we talk about trauma later on, I want to just point out that, you know, like, I never thought of that word trauma until much later in my life, where when I went to therapy and started dealing with issues. But because growing up, I'm like, oh, I had a, you know, as we say in Mormonism, I was raised by goodly parents. My parents were loving, they were kind. You know, they weren't perfect, but they were, you know, good enough parents. And then around the time, so I was in it, loved it. I got called to serve a mission in Brazil. And around that time, I started experiencing really intense anxiety and depression. Now, I'd had depression through you know, high school, junior high, but I always associated with sinning, right? I always thought oh, if I'm keeping the commandments, then I'm going to be happy, because that's what, you know, it's promised in Mormonism, that if you keep the commandments, you're going to be happy. And so it wasn't until before my mission when I felt like I was doing everything right, and I felt awful. I just felt like I couldn't shake it. It felt like a gnawing sense of guilt, like I'd done something wrong. I remember going and, you know, in Mormonism, we confess things to our ecclesiastical leader, our bishop. And I would go and I almost had this OCD need to confess to him. Like, I would confess everything, tell him everything I did, just like anything to kind of get rid of this feeling, but it wasn't going away. And I remember having a lot of talks before my mission, before I went. So it's a 2-year mission for those who are unfamiliar with Mormonism. But, you know, got a lot of encouragement, just like, look, this is Satan. He's trying to keep you from going on your mission. Go out there. You're going to feel great. Well, I went out there and just felt worse, and made it the whole 2 years, but it was awful. I mean, it was a good experience, but it was also just you know, I remember trying to preach happiness to people, but I didn't feel happy. You know, here I was supposed to have the answers at 19 to what a happy life should be. And I felt like I was lying, but even then I felt you know, I believed in the church. So it was the problem must be me, obviously. So I thought, you know, I was the problem. And that's kind of where the beginning of the cracks started with Mormonism. So I came home from my mission, still very believing, but still really disappointed that my, you know, my mental health wasn't good. I started questioning things in the church, because I remember, you know, I was in some really poor areas in Brazil, and seeing the richness, even though they had such poor lives, the richness of their life, their lives were full. They had family, and they, you know, I don't know how to just close community, friendship, love. Their lives were full, even though they were so poor. And I remember getting picked up at the airport, And again, on I-15, driving from Salt Lake City to my home in Farmington, which is like 15 miles north of Salt Lake, and seeing all like the fancy houses, lining the hills, and just feeling like the emptiness of those houses. Like there were rich, opulent McMansions lining the hills, but empty compared to like the fullness of like the Brazilian people. And so that was just like sitting with me. And then it wasn't until it was a slow unraveling of Mormonism from then. Like a lot of podcasts, I found an ex-Mormon podcast called Mormon Stories, where people would share their stories of like their doubts about the church. And so I started listening to that. But even then, I was still believing. But then about 10 years ago, I started kind of like investigating the different issues. Um, like a big one for me was the Prop 8 campaign out here in California, which was to make marriage just between a man and a woman. Well, the church like really fought hard against that. Or no, it fought in favor of that. I'm sorry. It was supported in favor of making marriage between a man and a woman. And it felt so wrong to me that the church would be, dumping all this money into this campaign to limit, other people's. It was kind of like, why don't we just live and let live? And eventually it was enough that my faith just broke and crashed. And with that became like, my entire sense of identity, my entire worldview. I mean, it was one of the most painful experiences where it's just like, what, so disorienting too. Like, who am I at that point? And from there, I started I became like a very hardcore atheist. I was like, well, this life's all there is. I threw everything out with it. And was starting to feel better with that because I wasn't feeling the pressure of the church, but I was still dealing with all this depression and anxiety. And it would come up, it would resurface in times. And then till finally, mushrooms is what kind of led me to like a better mental health. So I was actually with my co-host of the podcast, Doug. We were in Utah for a fantasy football draft of all things. We had like this ex-Mormon fantasy football league. And we were there in Utah. And, we were going to like keep drinking that night, get drunk, go out on the town, just, but instead this other friend who I had from high school was like, hey, Mike, come up to this reggae festival and come do mushrooms with me. So Doug and I went up there, and, the reggae festival was winding down for the night. It's like 10 p.m. And he gave us some mushrooms as we were like in the RV on the way up. And they kick in. And I remember like first being very disoriented. Like we were at some stage and it was like the local bands playing now. And I started panicking, like, oh, here I go. I've left the church. Now I'm doing drugs. Now, like I'm on a slow spiral to hell. And I remember this man in a butterfly costume was like flapping his butterfly wings around me. And I was just like terrified. But then my friend, like, I don't want to get too much into that story. We talk about it on the podcast, but eventually the night ended. My friend who was kind of guiding us through the journey, he's like, could sense that we were disoriented, brought us around this fire. And for the entire night, he's a beautiful musician. He just played us the most like ethereal, beautiful music. And I remember, it was like a remembering. I don't know if you've had that before with mushrooms, but it was like this, oh, this is what it feels like to be Mike. And I'd forgotten. And I felt like my soul had snapped back into place. And I was like, oh, it felt so good. And the thing about it is it remained, not to that intensity, but like I didn't do any other psychedelics for a whole year afterwards as I was integrating that and just kind of like, but I could recall that feeling of like, oh, there's more. I remember something. I remember more of my personality, more like parts of myself that I repressed. And it just felt so good, so freeing. And then, so a whole year went by. And then I did mushrooms one more time, and this was a bigger dose this time. And for the next 2 weeks, I felt so great. And then something happened, like an event triggered it. And then I just felt awful again. And I'm like, well, what is this? And so I'm like, I've got to go see a therapist. I got to figure this out. Like, and in the first session, I found this good therapist, who I'm still seeing today, by the way. She's amazing. And we, in the first session, I'm just sobbing to her, talking about like the growing up Mormon and the guilt around like masturbation and sexuality, um, at the difficulty of going on a Mormon mission. And towards the end of the session, after I'm done just like crying for 45 minutes, she's like, okay, I want you to read this book. It's called Complex PTSD. And this will help you we're going to work through this trauma you've experienced. And I was like, trauma? What do you know? It was complex PTSD. Like, what? No, come on. Like, and she kind of gives me this look like, all right, you're a 40-year-old man who's been crying in my office for the last hour about things that happened to you 20, 30 years ago. If that's not trauma, what word do you want to use for it? You can come up with another word if you want, but and that combination of therapy, and then it's like psychedelics also opened up a whole world of like yoga and mindfulness and meditation and breath work and all these other practices. So then to kind of fast forward a little bit, COVID hit, and that's a scary time for all of us. Like the world is very disorienting at that time. But it allowed me, like the world also paused. And so it allowed me to really deepen into some of these practices that I'd been getting into. I'd wake up in the morning and do yoga. I started doing this Kundalini yoga sadhana where I'd wake up at 4:30 with this group online, and we would do Kundalini yoga for 40 straight days. And I remember my co-host Doug calling me at the time, and we had just done like we each done separate mushroom journeys over the weekend. And we were just laughing, talking about the funny things that came up, the weirdness of it all. And he's like, Mike, we should start a podcast. I could listen to you to tell like funny mushroom stories all the time. And of course I was like, no, there's no way I could do a podcast. I can't do that. Like, and then the next morning, I was doing that. I was in the middle of that 40-day sadhana, and I was in the glow of it. So you wake up at 4:30, there's a bunch of like meditations, kriyas, mantras. In the end, I was kind of basking in the glow of it. And I text Doug, I'm like, Doug, what if it's not just a podcast where we tell funny trip stories, but what if we also talk about all these things we're doing, all these, like this, almost like the reverse of a Mormon mission, where when we were missionaries, we thought we had all the answers and we're trying to teach the truth to the world. What if it's two Mormons like being like, oh, we don't know shit. And instead, like with wide-eyed curiosity, like, what are all these new modalities? What are these things? And, soon, so we start the podcast. He was totally on board. And next we're talking to people who know things about aliens and know things about, we just dive into this whole world of like, what is life? And that was almost 4 years ago. And it's been such an adventure. And I've met the coolest people, had the time of my life. It's led me to, so now I through my therapist and working with dreams with her, I became so fascinated with dreams and how working with dreams can just be such a powerful tool, especially in combination with because the journey imageries that you get like on a mushroom journey, very similar to a dream image, very metaphorical, very fluid, very weird. And so I've gone back. I've been doing a PhD for 3 years. I'm wrapping up my coursework this fall, and then I'll start my dissertation. And then I will have a PhD in depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara. So it's led my life on a whole new trajectory. And I've never felt more free. I've never felt more alive. I've never felt like stronger mental health wise, and not in the sense that I always feel happy, but in the sense that I feel like I could navigate. I'm okay with being sad when I'm sad. I'm okay with being angry, expressing anger. I'm okay with like flowing more okay. I'm not saying I'm totally okay with it, but like, you know what I mean? It's like such a more fluid, stronger mental health than I've ever had. And I owe a lot of it to mushrooms. Mushrooms were what got me to go to therapy. They got me into all these other practices. I'm not saying that they are like a panacea, but they're such an incredible tool. And what has it unlocked for me? I mean, I was even joking with my co-host a couple weeks ago. I'm like, Doug, do you think maybe we're still on that first mushroom journey? Like, this is just like our life. Like, we're gonna wake up tomorrow like, oh wait, this last 4 years was just one long extended trip. And to be honest with you, it wouldn't surprise me. So
Well,
I mean, that's my story in a nutshell, I guess.
Mike, I don't even know how to thank you for sharing this. This was, I mean, just the way you succinctly explained your life from a child to now is, wow. I mean, you did a great job. Thank you so much for just opening up like that and sharing this with everybody. Um, just to, and we're gonna I'm going to bring Denise on in a couple seconds. She's got some questions for you, I know, and then we're going to open it up to questions from people that are here live. So, Nakama, if you're here and if you want to type something into the Q&A, make sure you do it now, and we'll try our best to get to all the questions. We'll do our absolute best. I haven't looked yet. I have no idea how many there are, if any, but we will check them out. Um, and I'll talk to you later about contacting you if necessary. But I do want to put this out there in case anybody's interested. If you want to write this down, the name of Mike and Doug's podcast is Mormons on Mushrooms. It's very easy to remember. You're not going to forget that. And I will tell you, it is absolutely awesome. They do a great job. They're total pros and their stories are just unbelievable. So, Mormons on Mushrooms. I'm going to bring Denise, come on back here, and I want to talk to you for a couple seconds before, and you've got some questions for Mike. But one thing I actually was, I had on in my notes here to talk about at the very beginning when I brought you on, but I totally forgot. As what it would happen, this stuff happens, when you're live, you get caught up in the moment and you just sometimes forget things. So I do want to mention, Denise and I have come up with a program together that we do help people, because a lot of you that are on here tonight are brand new to this, and you might have never experienced microdosing mushrooms. You don't know anything about them, and that's totally fine. And then others of you are very, very experienced. And over the couple of years, 2 or 3 years that I've had this podcast, I've been on my microdosing journey for a little over 3 years now. I've had so many people say, well, how do I do this? Like, what do I do? I don't feel comfortable doing this on my own. And so, Dr. Denise and I have a formal program. It's a one-on-one program where we pretty much take you from start and hold your hand and get you. And it's not only about microdosing magic mushrooms or using psychedelics or using mushrooms. It's really the most important part of the program is to get you to feel exactly the way you want to feel every day. Or as Mike said, every day is not perfect. I mean, you still feel emotions. If something bad happens, you're going to feel that. And we want to feel that. But you also want to feel really good every day in general. And we can get you to your goals and get you to where you want to be and help you along the path with microdosing if that's what you choose. And I asked me this question the other day. Well, Dr. Dave, do I have to microdose if I want to be in your program? Like, I'm not feeling great now. I kind of know where I want to be, but I'm just not feeling it, and I don't know how to get there. Well, but I don't really want to use magic mushrooms. Well, guess what? That's totally fine. We will absolutely work with you to do everything we can. We've had a bunch of people go through this program already who we've gotten back on track. They've gotten their lives back on track, and it's working very well. So we never beg. We never insist that you do this. The right people that want to do this will find us, and you can just send me an email, send Dr. Denise an email, and just let us know you're interested, and we'll take it from there. But again, we don't beg anybody. We don't pressure you. I don't make a million announcements about it, but because again, those of you that know you want to change and know you need some help, you'll find us. So having said that, Dr. Denise, welcome back. And I know you've got some questions. And Mike, by the way, one more thing before Denise, sorry, had once. When you mentioned driving along I-15 in the Salt Lake Valley and looking up at the Wasatch Mountains, and seeing those beautiful, large houses, and the way you described it, I can't remember your exact words, but I just felt empty or something like that. I totally understand what you mean by that. 100%. That was a really great analogy. And then the people in Brazil who maybe didn't have much, they were content and happy with their lives every day or as much as possible. So I loved that analogy, Mike. Thanks for that. Denise, go ahead. Take it. I'll stop talking. Take it away.
We need to have these longer, right? So thank you. And tonight's the first time I'm meeting you, Mike, and I'm just so appreciative. And you know that we kind of had some questions ahead of time. I'm not sure if you saw them or not, but in listening to you, you answered every single one of the questions without me yet asking them. But it brought to mind a few things, and there's a couple of extra ones that I was thinking of. And your story is amazing. And one of the reasons we do work with people, by the way, is because it really is, like you said, Mike, that combination, the psychedelics along with the work alongside. One of my questions was, have you done anything else? And you answered that. I know you do the podcast. I've listened to a few episodes, but that work that we have to do, that we can't just take mushrooms and be like, okay, that's all I have to do, like the mainstream medical model. So all of those things that you're doing. And I also, I wrote down some of the things you said. I am a psychologist. I have a full practice. I see a lot of symptoms: anxiety, depression, attention deficit, and absolutely trauma. And I will often get the question, I don't know if I have trauma. Do you think I have trauma? And the answer for me would be, well, let's see. But I can unequivocally now say anybody who's alive now has trauma. And the reason I could say that is you brought up the pandemic. We had a global trauma. And while that presented some opportunities for people, especially you were able to kind of, get on and do the Kundalini yoga. And there were so many things. The world was, as you described, your sense of identity, your worldview, and who you were when you were sort of went to Brazil and looking at the mountains. And that is a clear trauma. And we talk about CPTSD because there's complexity, right? So for anybody who wants to just quickly know, like, if I saw a car accident or I was in a car accident and it scared me and, really terrible, I was fine, but my car went out of control, there's a trauma. When you have profound questions about, like, who are you, your worldview, like everything turns upside down, that is that complex PTSD. And we know that psilocybin, psychedelics, but specifically psilocybin, absolutely rewires and helps people heal that. And so, along with the other work that you have described. And I'm so, again, I don't know you, I'm meeting you for the first time. When you said a therapist, and a good therapist, that is a rare thing, actually. So I love that you have someone and that you can, do that work, who truly gets that, because that's pretty difficult. So one of the questions I didn't hear you answer, of all the list here that I thought I was going to ask you, so we're going to save a lot of time. Do you currently dose? And do you do, like, so what the work that Dr. Dave and I do is about microdosing. People can take lower doses, higher doses, not dose at all, but the podcast and like the programs, it's all microdosing. So I just wanted to ask you if you had a particular dose schedule. Do you microdose? Do you always take higher doses? What's that for you?
So I've done, a lot of higher doses, but then also I've done microdosing quite a bit. But I've never been good at following a protocol. For me, it's much more of an intuitive approach. Like there'll be days, like I did yesterday and the day before, and then I didn't today. But before that, I don't think I'd done any microdoses for like a month or two. I have these little capsules, and it's just kind of like when I just feel like it, or sometimes when I remember. It's I find that when I do it, it usually helps. There's a focus aspect to it. I mean, it's a little tricky though. It doesn't always help me focus, because sometimes it wants me to go to more of a creative space. But what it always does is it reminds me to get in touch with my body. Like, that the microdose will start to happen, and the first thing I'm doing, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm stretching. I'm realizing the tension I'm holding here. I'm yawning. I'm like, it's like a reminder to kind of get out of your head and into your body. And I like how you said it's I mean, it's a tool. That's all it is. You are the medicine. And so, for those listening who don't want to do mushrooms, there's so many other modalities. I mean, I think a lot of this is, let's get back into the body. Let's get out of it. We're so used to living in our head. And so just a reminder to get up, move our body, stretch, there's a lot of practices you can do, like the body scans, just body scanning. Where do I feel tension right now? Get curious about the tension. Just little practices like that can make a huge difference. And a lot of times because the whole point about microdosing is you're not really supposed to feel it too much. It kind of operates under the surface. But that's the one thing I do always notice is that, oh yeah, I'm just so much more aware of my body than when I don't.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I will say to you, because I do a lot of coaching on dosing and schedules and whatever, that intuitive is a protocol.
Oh, it is. Okay. So I'm doing, okay. I do follow protocol. There we go.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, when, you dose when you feel like it and you're experienced. And so you can sort of just feel it and know it and trust that intuitive connection to the wisdom of the mushrooms and know how to work with all that. You can do that. So a lot of times when people are starting out, they want to kind of track what they're doing. So we say, okay, start with twice a week or do this or do that. And, kind of, we go from there. And I used to say sub-perceptible with microdosing, certainly higher doses, you're definitely going to feel it, tripping macrodoses. But at a microdose level, we used to say sub-perceptible. A lot of people say that. Paul Stamets and I have adopted this. It's sub-intoxicating, meaning you're not supposed to feel super high and like, whoa, I'm really on something, but you definitely feel it. And oftentimes people dial in their dose based on, oh, I feel a little something. That's good. Maybe I'll take a little more. Okay, that's a little bit much. Okay, back up. And that's the right dose. So you feel it. But even if you don't, it's always working. And we know that. So just sort of a couple other things. So, the trauma and it being so profound in your life and your unique journey. And now you're actually, finishing a doctorate and dissertation. I mean, that's just, wow. That's just amazing. I mean, welcome to the profession, right? And I'm sure you're going to, integrate all of this work. I mean, we know psychedelic assisted therapy is a big revolutionizing mental health. And I'll just mention that veterans, like war veterans, are the face of trauma and using psychedelics, specifically microdosing psilocybin, and it is saving lives. So it kind of two questions, but I'm going to merge them here. The idea that that mushroom saves lives because it heals trauma. And we know that trauma causes a lot of physical symptoms. And when you just said that, when you dose, you kind of get into the body. Stress, trauma, depression, anxiety, those things cause physical health issues. So we are taking care of ourselves. We're extending the quality and quantity of our lives. And, war veterans are certainly advocating for that. They have one of the highest, suicide rates, and their suicide rate is declining. And they're saying, absolutely, this needs to be more in the forefront as it's becoming as far as a medicine, because it is really healing. It's not just treating and numbing, it's actually changing without being on all these other, psychopharmacology, whatever. So I just wanted to bring up that topic and see, it's, by the way, why it's so in the news and it's the FDA and all, really trying to fast track it for approval so that it can be more legal and approval and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to, given that it's the first time I'm meeting you, the question sort of do you have, it's more like a comment about, sort of that, it really changing and saving lives, your life or anybody else's, what your sort of thoughts were about that.
Yeah. So good, because I mean, so on the podcast we do, I mean, as David knows from being a guest, we sometimes we go on tangents. We have a hard time sticking to a schedule or sticking to we have a hard time sticking to anything. And so the podcast, we've done 170 episodes now in the last 4 years, and it's a combination of sometimes it's just Doug and I, sometimes we bring on a guest, sometimes we bring on, we just, what are we feeling like today, you know? But of those 170 episodes, I bet we brought on at least half of them have been guests. And the stories we get of people, you know, saving them from suicide ideation, from just the, just, it's so surprising. It's still surprising to me today, just how helpful it's been for people, right? Like, and it's I'm always in awe of these stories that we get when people come on to tell their stories. And you know, there is a little bit of an up and down too. People it's a relationship you're developing. Like if you decide to use psychedelics, you're developing a relationship with that specific medicine. And you know, it can ebb and flow just like any relationship, right? But for the most part, like you see it like really improving the quality of life. You know, we interviewed several people who were out actually like active believing Mormons when they went down this, when they started using psychedelics. And one of the questions was, well, how could you justify that? And they're always like, look, I was out of options. I'd been on SSRIs for God knows how many years. I was, it was my last hope. And they found that renewal through it. And usually it opens the door to like all these other modalities. And, you know, they start going to therapy, or then they start, or the therapy actually starts working now, you know, like, because in conjunction with therapy, it can be very powerful. In fact, I would always almost recommend that you have a good therapist, because especially if you're going to be doing larger, or, you know, like bigger doses, more than a microdose, because you're going to want someone to process the imagery that comes up, to integrate it with, whether it's an integration. There's a lot of people out there that specialize in psychedelic integration, a lot of therapists. And so I would highly recommend that, because sometimes those, you know, depending on the journey, it can be pretty disorienting sometimes. And you're going to want someone to talk it through.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a great point. And you mentioned when you were describing your story about the dreams. And we do see that there's more imagery sometimes when people start microdosing. I've worked with people that really don't recall their dreams. They start dosing and the dream material is there, and it's the language of the soul, and it really helps guide like a little bit of a roadmap. So, you know, that combination. And if you have the, you know, benefit of finding a therapist that really knows how to work with all of that, it is life changing. So it, you know, absolutely, you know, heals
Yeah.
and changes. And, you know, certainly everyone who, you know, follows us and the podcast and these webinars knows that that's absolutely what I have personally experienced, professionally experienced. And I've been advocating for this for a really long time, because I know it really does heal. And I will say this, and I don't know if you found this, Mike, and we're going to get to questions in just a minute, that sometimes along the path you encounter very difficult material. You don't necessarily feel better. You know, like all of a sudden people will say to me, oh, you know, Dr. Denise, why am I feeling so terrible? I was feeling so great. And now I feel like all of a sudden all this, you know, sort of pain and anxiety. And it's like the mushrooms, along with the work that we're doing, or dreams, et cetera, will guide us right to where the healing is needed. And it is good to have some guidance with that sometimes, or, you know, just sort of maybe, you know, have, especially if you're doing higher doses, like you mentioned, somebody who's really able to be helpful and grounding in that process. So thank you
Yeah,
for all of
absolutely.
that
And
reminding.
just one comment on that. The first time I did, so right before we started the podcast, before the idea of the podcast came up, Doug and I, we did ayahuasca together. And that's a very intense, you know, psychedelic. And I left that session. It was profoundly life-changing. But I left there feeling like I had to carry the world's emotions. Like it was my job to like, ooh, because it was showing me, you know, it's very energetic in those trip spaces. And so it was showing me the people who we were like doing the medicine with, that I was like, it was almost like a funnel of like emotion. And I was like the center of it. And so I left there feeling that way. And then I'm glad I had a good therapist. And she's like, I think it's showing you that this is what you tend to do. Like you pull people, like, that you're pulling emotions from people, or like, and then carrying them as if they were your own. Like, let's rephrase this. And I'm so glad. Otherwise, I'd been like maybe leaving that thing like, oh yeah, here I am. I'm the plight of the empath kind of deal. And it's like she's like, no,
Beautiful.
girl.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, really good example of like how to then relate to that material that comes up, whether it's through an ayahuasca, psilocybin, dream material, et cetera, et cetera.
And I
Thank
love
you. So
mentioning dreams. I love dreams. So yeah.
yeah, it's a big part of I use dreams a lot. So yeah, so glad to hear you mention all that. Go ahead, Dave.
It's interesting about the dream thing because Denise has done some very small webinars just with a very small group of people, or maybe not even webinars, maybe like a Zoom meeting with a small group of people about dreams. And I was thinking that maybe the next webinar we do here could be about dreams because they're so fascinating and so many unanswered questions. And I know Denise, you are really good at explaining and talking to people about dreams. So maybe we can make that either in the next webinar or a very future one, a very one in the very near future. Also, the poll here, most of you have answered. 87% have answered the poll, and I just want to share with you. So the question was, have you had trauma in your life? And it's simply yes, no, or I'm not sure. Well, this is very interesting. So 72% said yes so far. 21% said I'm not sure. So if my math is right, that's 93% that didn't say no. And I'm telling you, as Dr. Denise just said a little while ago, the ones that if you said you're not sure, you've had trauma. So we can really pretty much put you in that yes category. So 7% have said no. Good for you. As one of you said, I think Denise or Mike just said about COVID. COVID's still going kind of, but we had a real bad couple years at least about COVID. If that wasn't traumatic, man, I mean, I don't know what was. So, but anyway, thanks for answering the poll. We have, so you had 90% of you now have answered. So if the rest of you want to answer it, it's fine. It's totally anonymous. So you can feel free to just click off your answer. That's totally fine. Let's get to some questions for Mike. Amber, it's not a question, but she said, thank you both for sharing this healing journey. Amber, you are very welcome and really cool. Having Mike on here, I mean, I know he's got a great podcast, but I didn't really know how this was going to go. But I mean, I was really, really touched with Mike sharing his journey throughout his life. So you're very welcome, Amber. Julie asked a question. It's for Mike. Have your trips all been about religious trauma, or has anything else come up that's been healing for you?
That's a good question. No, they've not all just been about religious trauma. There's been, in fact, when you start going down this, I feel like, how can I best phrase this? So let's tie into this. So the dissertation I plan on writing is actually more about the ancestral psyche and how I think we inherit a lot of things, not just the strengths and our genetics from our ancestors, but we also inherit a lot of their trauma. And like I've had experiences where, especially in a psychedelic space, where I've had images of things that like my grandparents went through come up, and the felt emotions of those experiences. I had both of my grandpas served in World War II, and very specific imagery of World War II coming up in some of those journeys. Now, I don't know. It's one of those things, you're in that space. It's very metaphorical, right? Am I seeing a vision of what happened to them in their life? Am I making it all up? Is it just this? The whole question though is the felt, like the emotions, the felt aspect of it is real, whether or not the imagery is metaphorical or not. But so no, and I even think, there's been some stuff come up earlier, like around, I think people experience birth kind of trauma, and like the birthing process is very traumatic for an infant. So all sorts of different things can come up, and so not all about religion, although that especially the 2-year Mormon mission, I feel like was a pressure cooker for a nervous system. One of the things about complex PTSD is like where PTSD is like a single or maybe not single, but those big traumatic events, like Denise, you were talking about like a car accident or serving in the military or something. But when you're living for an extended period of time and when your nervous system is dysregulated, you don't have the time for the parasympathetic nervous system to kick in and recover. That's where you get like the complex trauma. And so a lot of it has been around the Mormon mission, especially.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So we have another question, and it's somewhat, I feel like maybe on some level answered partially. And that dysregulation, by the way, sorry, before I say the question, we are all traumatized, and the birth process, as you say, is trauma. It's normal trauma in the sense of, that sounds like an oxymoron. We are hardwired to cope in life, but when there is an overabundance of dysregulation, or we're getting way more kind of tossed at us than we are capable of handling, or at an age, or so anything really, it can be so run the gamut. It is trauma, and trauma that's not like the normal trauma, that we just like sort of get through. Oh, that was whatever. Like we are hardwired, but then we get dysregulated, and we know that. And so, never, if someone says, "Well, I don't think you've been traumatized," or "I think you're," like, that's not really the conversation. The conversation is more, how are we doing? If you feel like you're not feeling okay, that you're like dysregulated, that's worth kind of addressing. And we know that psilocybin can handle that. Okay, on to the question. The question is, do you recall the dose of that initial first dose that you had? And then the second part of that question is, which, if any, do you feel help more, the microdosing or the higher macrodosing? So
Oh,
first dose, and then that micro versus macro.
that's the question, because it's like at this point, it's like, where does one begin and where does one end, right? It's like all part of my journey, especially like, I would argue that even of all of it, working with my dreams has been the most effective thing I've done, because it's, we go into like a psychedelic space every night when we dream. I mean, it's very similar as emotion surfacing, and it's so ongoing. I would say that for someone looking to work with this, microdosing is enough of a tool if you're looking to improve your life. Now, if you're also curious, because there is a fun aspect to this as well, right? There is like an exploration and adventurous aspect to it. I think I've become a little bit of a psychonaut over the last few years. I mean, once we started the podcast, then of course we're getting all these invitations, and of course you're like, well, I'm going to try this one now, not that like I'm going to just try everything. But when it calls to me, I check. So like right now, what happens is like, I usually don't intentionally seek certain medicines, but like if something comes, like an offer comes into my realm, and I'm like, oh, this feels right. I'll check in with my body. I'm like, okay, this feels right. I want to do this. I'll participate. So I don't know if I can say which one's been more effective, but I feel like as far as mental health is concerned, and kind of getting back to a state where you are processing your emotions and navigating life in a more like a healthier way, I think microdosing is sufficient for that. I don't think you need to do it, but the big justice are kind of fun.
We have all types of people that are here attending, and some are very experienced with mushrooms and psychedelics, and others are brand new to it. So this is a question more for somebody that's a little bit newer to it. But the question is, I mean, I think you answered this already, part of it already, but I'll just read it. How often do you take mushrooms? Well, you already told us, Mike, that you don't have a set regimen, and you kind of do it when you want to by feel. But this person also says, I understand you took 2 or 3 macrodoses. So I'm going to reword this a little bit. When do you decide if you're going to take a microdose or if you're going to take a macrodose at a certain session? And not only that, the question goes on to say, and this is a little bit more of a beginner level, but some people do not know this. They don't understand exactly what's the actual difference between a microdose and a macrodose.
We'll start with that one, between microdose and macrodose. And Denise defined it very well. Like you said, it's not like necessarily sub-perceptual, because I like every time I take a microdose, I'm perceiving something. Like I said, I'm perceiving getting my body, but I'm present. I'm not I'm not in some other I don't have an issue like staying present. And which can be an tricky sometimes, because like for example, like sometimes the dosing on mushrooms, usually if you're taking, you know, microdose like 0.2, 0.3, you're always going to just be in that like microdose level. But you know, if you're, I've taken some where it's like double that sometimes and felt very little, and sometimes it's like, oh wait, this is really hitting me. It just kind of depends on a lot. I don't know, a lot of different factors. And so I would, I would, I mean, quantity wise, I would say anything over like a gram, you're getting more into like macrodose. Maybe even half a gram to, you know, usually less than half a gram is more of a microdose territory. And, you know, very different experiences in that one, you know, you are your ego, where your center of like your center of your conscious self is going somewhere else than kind of where you're at in the moment. And you know, I used to, when I early on in this, it was like when I needed to shake something up. I felt like when I was, you know, getting kind of rigid, and I was just like, look, I just want to kind of shake something up. I would usually do like a macrodose. And now, you know, I'm just kind of looking at it different, where lately, you know, when we first started the podcast, I think our tagline was, what did we say? Exploring higher consciousness while healing from toxic religious shame. And we like that. But then later, like the last half of our episodes have been less focused on healing and more focused on like re-enchantment. Kind of like the healing is realizing that you were never broken to begin with. That you know, and then, but sometimes we have to get through layers before we start realizing that, you know, we were never the problem. And so we've changed our tagline to, I think, like re-enchanting life or something, finding kind of re-enchantment in your day-to-day life. And so now I look at it more from an adventurous standpoint, like when am I ready to go on another adventure? And I don't, like right now I have nothing scheduled, but I'm sure this year something will, I'm sure I'll do something this year.
Only as we're recording this, it's only May, so I'm quite sure we probably will. But also, just to the person answered the question, asked the question, Guillermo. Sometimes we speak in milligrams and sometimes in grams, and so you really need to be pretty good in your mind to go back and forth between the two. And I actually did an episode on this on my podcast, Microdose U, a few months back. And so roughly a microdose is anywhere from 50 milligrams is very, very low, but some people do microdose on 50 milligrams, which is 0.05 grams, 0.05. And then usually the upper level of upper end of a microdose is, some people say, and I believe around 0.3 grams, which that would be 300 milligrams. As you get above that, as Mike just said, sometimes you need maybe a gram to really start feeling something a little bit stronger, but sometimes you don't. And sometimes you could take 0.5 grams, which is 500 milligrams, and that's kind of in between there somewhere. And it could, some people would say that's a little bit more of a macro. A macro is anything that's not a micro. But when you get into larger doses, like heroic doses, and so that's the way people refer to like very large doses. Those are generally heroic doses, generally in the 4 to 5 gram range plus, something like that. So just Guillermo, just since you asked the question, just to give you an idea, and anybody else that's here that is just not sure of how many grams or milligrams are in each, that's a short answer.
And one of the things I've got from, so just chiming on that real quick, I worked with this one woman once. She was like, you know, a shaman of sorts, and she practiced this thing which she's called the least effective dose, where she says, okay, for certain people, we're just trying to get your mind at a certain frequency. You know, you could look at it as like the different brainwave state, right? We're just trying to get you to a certain brainwave, and sometimes that's this amount for some person, sometimes it's this amount. that's really what we're trying to do. And because at that level, we can, you know, I don't know alpha, beta, zeta, whatever the brainwaves are, but at certain brainwaves, you know, you're at a state where that elasticity can happen, and you can change your mental state in those states. And so, but she's like, we're not trying to blast you off, we're trying to get you to. And I think for healing and therapy purposes, that's actually the most effective. Like, you can take those like heroic doses, but sometimes it's so hard to kind of grasp anything back from those big ones that are like meaningful to like mental health and to trauma and to healing. And so it's not always bigger the better.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Mike, and Denise, I know you got a question lined up ready to go, but thanks for saying that, Mike, because there's a lot of confusion out there, and there are people out there that pretty much say the only way to use magic mushrooms for healing, you've got to take a heroic dose, otherwise you're wasting your time. It's just simply not true. And also sometimes that could be actually very dangerous information. So, and Mike, you've done a combination of the two, which has seemed to have worked very well. I mainly microdose, but I've also done some larger doses. But people that want to only microdose, you will get healing. You just, it's cumulative, and you will get healing. So just make sure that if somebody's telling you the only way for this to work is a macro, I would run really, really quickly. So Denise, go ahead. I think you've got
Yeah.
we got some other questions here, at least one more.
Yeah, one more. And I did want to, just before I ask the question, I always caution people, know what you're taking too, because I myself, who I've been, microdosing, I'm going into my third year. There's one variety that I have. It happens to be what we call the penis envy variety. It's a lot more potent. And I normally could take 300 milligrams of other variety, even another penis envy one. This was a particularly strong one. And I actually had to take some out from some of my capsules because it was definitely more of a feeling when, I didn't want to have to be like teaching or working or something or other. So I had to adjust that. So, 500 of golden teachers is going to be different than 500 of like the albino penis envy. So the final question that I saw was from Jeremy, who I know what this question's about, but the sort of increase in vivid dreams to the point where there's exhaustion, waking up exhausted and being like, really short with people as a result of that. And I'll let you answer it if you have any suggestions or, recommendations.
If they're having so many vivid dreams that it's interrupting their sleep, kind of thing. Yes. So I would do something to bring some of those dreams into this waking reality. I know that might seem, but like start do a painting project, do something, whatever dream material you can recall, do something to express it, write them out, work with them. I think I've had a lot of people who, especially like with recurring dreams, they might have a recurring nightmare or a recurring dream that they're having. As soon as they start working with that, and you don't have to like consciously, you don't have to be like, oh, what does this mean? Express it. Start expressing it, and then more likely than not, that will start helping the dream frequency and material, and you'll get back to more of like a regular pace with it. That would be my recommendation.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. We say that the dreams and microdosing, it brings that material. So what you're saying, Mike, is terrific. Then you bring that into the day and you use that material, and people can have daydreams actually, where, it's kind of like all of a sudden you're sort of thinking about something and your mind's going off. So really excellent advice to bring that material during the day and work with it a little bit. So thank you.
And it can be some of the most creative material. I mean, I've written songs from dreams. I've painted stuff. It's incredible, like the creative capacity that, I mean, you're getting. It's almost like you're getting gifted this. I know you rather sleep and you want to get better sleep, but use that in some way, and then hopefully then your psyche will be like, okay, he's getting the messages, or he or she or whatever, and then like we'll let him sleep more now.
Mike, I know your podcast co-host Doug, and you two had just had recently had a gig, a musical gig where you guys were playing music here right outside of Salt Lake City last month. Did you or did both of you or one of you did you just start taking something like, I don't know if I heard that on your podcast episode or not, but did you just recently start playing music when you
Yeah.
started for all this? Is that a new thing for you?
But both of us. So with that time when we both had our first mushroom dose, we both knew like a few chords on the guitar. We both knew how to play a couple songs. And then from there, I mean, that's one of the beauties of all this is like we started, it's like this rush of creativity. And so we started writing music. Usually we write our individual songs, but then we perform them together. We started a band called Bombadillo. And like in honor of Bombadil, Tom Bombadil, he's like the musician from Lord of the Rings, and we've done a handful of shows and they're so much fun. It's like my my favorite creative outlet is to sing and to perform, especially music that I've written. And I think, that's one of the things, like 5 years ago I would not have called myself a creative person. And when you're doing, it's not just the psychedelics, but when you're getting back in touch with your greater self, the self that you don't remember who you are, like your ego has this very narrow view of who you are. Who you are is so much bigger and deeper than that. As soon as you get in touch with that, you're getting in touch with your inner diva, your creative center, and flow with it. See what comes out. You'll be surprised. Music, art, poetry, start writing, start singing, start dancing, expressing, and all of us are creative beings, highly creative beings.
The fact that you and Doug both from like you said you knew a few chords, but let's say almost from scratch on along this journey, and now at the point where you're writing songs and performing in front of audiences, that is absolutely awesome, Mike. That's
Thank
incredible.
you.
Oh my God. I know I wanted to come to your last gig. I can't remember what I said. Oh yeah, I know what I was doing. I was running that race early the next morning. But when you guys come back to this area, I absolutely will come to you guys. That's amazing.
Oh, it was such a fun show. And like, yeah. And halfway through you kind of get in your head. We played an hour and a half set of mostly just original music. And halfway through we're like, are they getting bored? Are they? And then at the end they wanted more, and encore, and it was a perfect like crowd. It was so much. I've been it's been harder to come back from that than it has been from like my psychedelic trips. Like,
It's funny you said, because sometimes we're an hour into this right now. I start to think to myself, are the people that are here are nakama, as I say, are they getting bored? But it's just almost everybody is hanging in there. Almost every single person. We had one or two drop off, but so I don't think anybody's getting bored. I wanted to bring up, before we close, I want to bring up one more thing, because we do have a few newbies on here that just don't know or not well versed on mushrooms. And when Dr. Denise was mentioning penis envy, a little, that's actually a type of mushroom. It's a type of psychedelic mushroom. So don't get any ideas other than that. It's just it's the way it's shaped. It looks, that's what it looks like, kind of. So I just wanted to clear the air on that one. We'll go around and and then we'll close it. Any final words? Let's go to Denise first. Any final words at all?
I thank you so much, Mike, for doing this. And I just, like, welcome to the party. Like, Dave started this, and it's been just, how can I say it? Just delightful to meet you and to hear your story, and to have that kind of side by side, like all the work you've done, where you are, and this music that you're doing, like everything you say. I have to tell you that I have known that this is what can happen for people. And it's just so nice to meet you and see that that's changed your life and healed so much, and that you're going to be continuing to bring that to other people. It's just amazing. And this personally for me and my work, that I was always kind of the outcast, like, what are you talking about? None of that's going to be helpful. So it really is very validating and helpful, and just such a pleasure to hear your story and meet you. So thank you very much.
Mike, and when you give your last words, please, again, I've already shared that your podcast is called Mormons on Mushrooms, and your co-host being Doug. But if there's a way that people can follow you even more, or get in touch with you if they want, I know you've got an Instagram. uh, account. Just feel free to share anything you want there as well.
Yeah, David, Denise, this has been so great. I love this. Anytime you guys want to chat about this, want to chat about dreams sometime, anything, I'm so game. And the questions have been great. This has been, this lights me up. Discussions like this light me up. And David, and for people listening, David was on Mormons on Mushrooms a couple months ago. I know he wants a redo. He doesn't feel like he's great in it. I'll just tell you, he's great in it. Check that out. It's just from a couple months ago. David came on Mormons on Mushrooms, and it's a great episode.
If I could just say this, so Mike and Doug's podcast is very different than mine. Mine, it's usually me, and I've got a topic, and I kind of stick to it, and I just pretty much. And sometimes I have a guest, but we stick to now on their podcast. And again, this is great. I love their show. I listen to so many of them, but a lot of times they are all over the place, and they're coming up with like little side stories. And so I was trying to tell my story, and I just felt like and a lot of it's on me. I just wasn't really congruent, and then adding into their whole side story thing. So I'd love a redo. Well, maybe not a redo. We could just come on and talk about something else at some time. But and you're more than welcome to come back here, Mike, because this is you exude positivity and great energy, and that's what we love. So you're more than welcome. If you want to, we'll love to have you come back as well. So go ahead.
I would love to. Yeah, I'd love to. And so, yeah, so David, yeah, hopefully, because I feel bad if you didn't feel like you got to tell your story in the way you wanted to, but like, it's a good episode. But yeah, the best way to, I love it if anyone wants to contact me. Mormons on Mushrooms on Instagram is the best way. So the best way to cut me. And I'm pretty good at responding, but I'll respond eventually. But like Instagram, I don't know, social media is not my thing. And we also have we just started an Instagram page for our band, Bombadilio. That's, I think we have like 80 followers there now. We're like 80 followers. But you know what? I'm more happy with those 80 followers than I am with whatever we have right now on Mormons on Mushrooms, because it feels so I don't know. But that's the best way. This has been a delight. And yeah, you guys are great. And Denise, has been so lovely meeting you.
Well, again, let's thanks to you, Mike, and thanks Denise again for always being here, helping me out with this co-hosting with me. Mike, we will absolutely have you back. We'll talk offline about this. But again, from the bottom of my heart, and I speak for everybody here, I'm sure you are, as you say on your show. I usually don't talk like this on my show, but I feel like I just have to say this, and I hope you guys don't mind. But Mike, you are a fucking awesome human being, and I really want to do more with you and have you back, and with Doug if he wants to as well. You guys are really awesome. So again, from my heart, thank you so much again for being here, and we're going to also turn this into a regular podcast episode, so a lot more people are going to be experiencing you and your story, and this is what it's all about. The more we can just help people, that's the way I see it. And also one more thing, I totally resonate with those 80 people that are following you on that one Instagram account with your band. Just think about that. That's 80 people that really want to know more about you and your band. And just think if you had a room of 80 people that were all it's amazing. So each one of those people is a somebody that's really important. So it's not always the numbers. It's the quality of the person and the energy of the person that's following. And so I'll end it. Thanks again, guys. Everybody that's been on here live, we appreciate your energy, your questions, your telling us where you're from, everything about you. We love you. We're here to help you. And if there's anything we can ever do to help you out, let us know. Remember, my podcast is Microdose U, and a brand new episode comes out every single Wednesday and Friday. And as I say on the end of every single one of my podcast episodes, and I feel like I have to say it here live to you, love you guys. Really do. Take care, and we will see you soon.